What is one memory that never fails to make you smile every time you think about it? The last time I saw my great grandma, Claudine, she was 98 and had horrible dementia. She didn't recognize my grandmother, her daughter, and it was honestly very sad. We were going to her house because my papa, her husband, passed away and we needed to go to his funeral. Before we left, we got a car wash and one of the guys there gave us a red carnation. It was a weird promotion or something, I think. But after a 10-plus hour drive, we made it to her house. I rushed inside and overheard my grandma begging my great-grandma to remember her because my grandma had recently been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. I gave her a second, knocked, and walked in. The very first thing my great-grandma said when she saw me was, "Is that my beautiful Nicole?" I nearly cried just from that. My grandma was super happy she remembered me, but sad she didn't remember her, and decided I should spend time with her alone. She went off to get some food, I think, but I don't really know, so it was just me and my grandma. We chatted for a while, and the inevitable question finally came up. "Me, who was that woman in here earlier? That's your daughter." "Oh, really? Why does her hair look so weird?" "Oh, it's a wig. She's bald now." I couldn't bring myself to tell her her daughter had cancer even though she wouldn't remember. She giggled a bit, then attempted to pull me in and said, "I'm gonna steal her wig." I laughed. She couldn't walk or lift her own arms on her own, let alone snatch a wig right off of my grandmother's head. After about an hour, my tummy started to grumble, so I called my grandma back in and went to the kitchen for some potatoes. After maybe 5 minutes, I heard my grandma scream. I was afraid my great-grandma finally had passed away and rushed in, but it wasn't that bad at all. My great-grandma actually did it. She took the wig right off of my grandma's head. She told her to come close to whisper a secret, and with all her might, she snatched it right off her head. She went on to live in a care home and got into many more antics and would call once a week begging me to steal her away and start a traveling band. Great-grandma still got that sleight of hands tricks going on. Story 2. Any memory with my grandpa? Well, he technically isn't my real grandpa, but he's who I grew up with my whole life. The man was hardworking, loving, funny, and every positive aspect you'd ever want in a grandpa. But there's one memory that stands out. 6 years ago, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, colon cancer, and Alzheimer's. They weren't diagnosed together, but he took those diseases to the grave. It was too much for him to be awake during all of it, so they medically induced a coma that he never woke up from. Throughout all of it, he never moved a muscle. The quiet sounds of his breathing were all we heard. At one point, my sister was by his side in tears like the rest of us, and out of nowhere, he reached up with his arm and gave my sister a hug. No one else got any action from him, not even my grandma. It's a memory none of us will forget, especially not my sister. He passed away on March 4th, 2014, and our family gets together for ice cream on that date, along with his birthday, to celebrate his life. He didn't deserve the pain he went through one bit, but I have no doubt that his loved ones greeted him with a smile when it was all over. I love you, Grandpa. Story 3. My grandmother had very, very bad dementia as well. She passed away a few years ago at 93. Her husband, my dad's father, was a veterinarian and survived some dangerous encounters as they were in the USSR. I was born there as well. He passed away when I was still a child, on his lap, due to a stroke. Decades later, I was out of town in college and my parents couldn't care for her anymore due to constant supervision and medical needs. My father moved hell and earth to get her to the top of the list of one of the best care facilities in Los Angeles. Towards the end, she couldn't remember who he was very well, let alone his wife, who was there just about every single day, taking care of her mother-in-law. While my dad went to work to pay for the privilege of us being alive and healthy. We are immigrants from Eastern Europe, USSR at the time, and you can't just give up on family. I went to visit her with my dad for the first time in almost a year, and I was nervous. I felt horrible for not seeing her more often as she practically raised me through grade school. I was afraid she wouldn't remember me. As soon as I walked in, I saw her face light up and she said my name and hugged me and kissed me on the cheek. She introduced me to everyone there, staff and patients. My dad took a picture of me and her outside in the garden that afternoon. I don't consider myself to be photogenic, so I wasn't a fan. A year or so later, she passed at that facility. A few days after the service, my mom asked me if I wanted to have something that belongs to my grandmother. It was a framed photo, that same photo of that day in the garden with her face lit up and smiling ear to ear, and with me, with my standard half-smile smirk, my arm around her and her gripping my hand. The frame had a little Nana in me, and the nurse told us that it had been on her bedside table since that day, next to a picture of her husband and my sister. I keep that picture in its frame on my nightstand next to my stuff for when I get ready in the mornings. I've done a lot of bad things in my life, but every day I see that picture, I can't help but remember how good it felt that she remembered me and thought the world of me, despite life's best efforts to erode all of her memories. Story 4. My mom found out she had stage 4 lung cancer and passed away when I was young. When she got diagnosed, she was given 6 months to live, so needless to say, she gave us lots of amazing memories and really lived in the moment. The one story I always tell when talking about my mom was how one day she let me and my older sister stay home, which was a big deal in 1st and 3rd grade already. We went to Bulk Barn and got every item we wanted. When we got home, we snuggled in my parents' bed, spread out what felt like a never-ending amount of bags of chocolate and candy, and watched Disney movies all afternoon. When my dad came home from work, he just jumped right in and joined us. It was right before she went into hospice and the last good day I remember her having before she passed away, so the memory holds a very special place in my heart. Man, ninjas are always preparing onions beside me. Next story, please. Story 5. About a year ago, I was in a discount grocery store. I had about $20 left after paying my bills and rent, so I had to be really careful about what I bought. After a lot of humming and eyeing for a couple of minutes over whether I could afford to spend $6 on coffee, I decided to put it back on the shelf and went to the register. As I was walking out of the shop, I heard a woman call after me, "Young man, forgot this." I turned around and she quickly put the jar of coffee into my bag. I started to protest, but she stopped me, saying, "I remember what it was like, not having enough money and having to go without. You take that coffee and enjoy it, mate." She had the biggest smile on her face. She was like a beacon of light during one of my darkest times, and I always remember her. With every cup of coffee, I can't help but smile, because now each cup reminds me that there are truly good people in the world. Story 6. My dad was retired in the military. When I was pregnant with my son, he came to stay at my house near my due date. Things start happening, and off we go to the hospital, my husband driving me in his car and my brother and dad following in their car. I had a truly horrible and very long contraction right before we got to the hospital. So my husband called my dad to tell him the new plan. He was going to grab a wheelchair for me, and then my dad was going to take me in to get admitted while the other two parked the cars. So we get out of the cars, and I'm sobbing, leaning on my dad while waiting for the wheelchair. He asks me if I'm okay. I think just as a reflex. Obviously, I say no. I can barely focus through the pain, and this is not a light, delicate tear slowly rolling down my cheek situation. So the wheelchair comes and I get in it. My dad starts pushing and hauls through the doors where I see there is a line of people waiting to check in at the front desk. Dad doesn't even attempt to wait in line. He goes directly to the side of the desk as fast as he can push my fully pregnant self. He doesn't look like he's planning on stopping for the little old lady who's being helped, so I put my feet out to stop the wheelchair. Luckily, she doesn't take very long, and my dad soon pushes me up a little further to talk to the woman behind the desk. "Hi, yeah, my daughter's in labor. She needs to be checked in right away." "Okay, sir, we can do that. We just need some ID from you." Now at this point, he's behind me, so I can't see him, but the contraction is finally starting to subside, so I'm calming down a little bit. But I can hear the disgust dripping from his voice when he says, "She's about to have a baby and you're worried about my ID?" She tells him yes, she doesn't need anything from me, but she does need to make a quick ID sticker for him. So logically, the next thing he says is, "Okay, fine, here's my driver's license, military ID, credit cards, what else do you need? Can we go now?" While emptying his entire wallet and tossing random cards on the desk. My dad was a career military man, and I've rarely seen him lose his cool, but the memory of him losing his cool and trying to help me while I was in pain always makes me smile. He passed away recently, and I really miss him. Story 7. My wife was my blind date to senior prom. I'd have to say that my first time seeing her is a memory that always makes me smile. That, or when she said yes to a second date, or when she said yes to marrying me. Basically, my wife in general. My original date to prom canceled on me. My plan was to just go by myself and hang out with my friends. However, my best friend's mom heard that I didn't have a date and decided to set me up. She asked one of her coworkers if her daughter would be interested in going on a blind date to prom, and her daughter said yes. Now, we had never met each other because she didn't go to the same school as me. She was actually homeschooled due to medical reasons. She's had seizures her whole life and had to drop out of school because of how bad they were getting. On a side note, she's been seizure free for several years now. This would probably be her only chance to go to a prom of any kind, so she decided to give it a try. Lucky for me. We met up at my best friend's house. We decided to double date so that she didn't feel uneasy. She, my friend, and his girlfriend knew each other already. I remember the first thought I had when she walked through the door, which was, this girl is way too pretty for me. I felt like she was way out of my league. Turns out she thought I was pretty handsome too. That night was one of the best nights of my life. The next day, I called her and asked if she'd want to go on another date, and she said yes. A few years later, we were married, and we've been together now for over 10 years. Story 8. There's a few, but one is super heartwarming to me. For context, my grandparents were always super religious and fairly old-fashioned, but they were cool with it. If they saw something they didn't like, you know what they'd do? They'd give you a smile, tell you to have a good life in a sweet way, and go on their way. One day, as most little kids do, I drew a picture. It was of an alien on Earth saying, "Wowee, I'm on Earth." I gave it to my grandpa. Instead of throwing it away and lecturing me about the Bible like most people I knew would, he hung it up on the wall next to his side of the bed. It was still there around 10 years later when he passed away. It was still there around 4 to 5 years after his death when Grandma passed. My stupid little drawing, drawn by a little kid and given to a person who would have thrown it away, was put in a place of honor for the majority of the time I knew my grandparents. I'm crying right now. I'm going to have to go up there and see if it's still there and ask if I can have it. Story 9. Honestly, I played baseball for 10 years, all the way from Little League to high school. My first several years, I was great, hitting the ball, catching fly balls, stealing bases, the whole nine. My father was always so proud of me. I could tell he was really invested in my games. He never missed a single one. Every single game, my dad would take me out for ice cream afterwards, and when I did something especially great, we would split a banana split. And I'll never forget the day when I first struck out. I messed up badly, and it cost me a game, and I was so hard on myself. I was so scared to see the look of disappointment in my dad's face because he always called me his star player. I sat on the other side of the bench, away from the bleachers, and was barely able to focus through the last half of the final inning. After we ran on the field and told the rest of the players, "Good game," I was afraid to make eye contact at the gate while I was leaving. I looked up, afraid to see my dad smiling ear to ear. He wrapped his arms around me and picked me up and told me I was still his star player. I asked if we could split a banana split. Instead of having to share, we each got our own, and I got some extra fudge. I'll never forget how much we laughed that night together. He taught me that failure isn't something to fixate on, but something to learn from. He taught me that failure doesn't have to be scary. He taught me that it was a necessary part of life to make someone better. He taught me that everyone makes mistakes, even big ones, and that the biggest part of failure is just to always have compassion. We've had a really hard life, separately and together, but I'll never share a banana split with anyone else. Story 10. Many years ago, I worked with severely challenged kids and teenagers. A group of us were in the gym with different kids doing different exercises, etc. We were all asked to be quiet, and obviously our curiosity was engaged. A beautiful young man, you know, the ones who should be out playing every sport possible, was about to stand up out of his wheelchair. He had done it before, so we were all smiling and happy for him once again. It took a huge effort for him to do just that. Cue clapping and general praise for a physical feat. Then he went quiet, stood as tall as he could, and took one step. We all hushed and watched. Then another, a very wobbly one. Now this is a boy who has never walked unaided before. Then another, and the whole room by now is up on our feet cheering and screaming and clapping and jumping up and down to egg him on. Most of us are very ugly crying too as he takes the very first steps by himself with no assistance of his life. And the best part? As if that wasn't good enough, his parents had come to speak to the school about starting a new sports program and had been watching through the doorway the whole time. Happy tears all around, and very, very happy memory. Story 11. My great-grandmother was an amazing woman. She was brought up in a conservative AF South Asian country, lost a son, and then lost her husband when she was still pregnant with her youngest son. She didn't have much in the way of an education, nor had she worked previously or had to, for that matter. But when push came to shove, she learned how to knit, cross stitch, and taught people that. She'd walk back and forth to her job since she couldn't afford transport. She raised 3 kids on her own, got her daughters married off early because that was a thing then. Both her daughters married the loves of their lives, and I've never heard a genuine complaint about that. When I was a kid, she was already older and grayer. She spent a few years in the country I was born and raised. And in those years, I got to have her as the most vibrant version of that person I know. My sister and I would huddle under our blankets trying to look convincingly asleep on so many school nights, stifling giggles and struggling to stay awake, only to sneak out after the folks went to bed and the coast was clear. We'd just walk around our compound in the cool black of night. We did nothing but talk. It was the most glorious and magical act of rebellion. I got to spend time with her again when I ended up in my home country for a 2-year stint, but by then I was in my 30s, and her, grayer still, balding, mostly bedridden and suffering from dementia. Every time I sat with her, she'd start off on her favorite story. My father was a tea plantation manager in Bhutan. I knew the story by heart. You could tell how this 90-something woman was still enamored by the memory of her father. She was almost childlike when she spoke of him. He would always be her dad, even if she was my aged great-grandmother. How they must have been the apple of each other's eyes sometime at the beginning of this century. I never tired of hearing her story. My grandma would interject sometimes on my behalf. "Mom, your mouth is going to hurt saying that same story again and again." I would shush my grandmother. Boro Amma didn't remember that she'd already had told me that story twice that day. It let her relive the happiest times of her life. Funny things about her brains. My Boro Amma was such a sweet woman in temperament, despite clearly having a spine shiny in chrome. And honestly, I thank whatever being is responsible for that so much. It made her last years so much easier, on her, on us. You see, on top of all the other ways she was fading, she wouldn't remember all of us. She would not even remember anything that happened maybe 5 minutes ago. I told her that her brother passed away maybe 2 to 3 times after that happened. Each time it was fresh grief for her. I stopped telling her. But it wasn't specific. She'd remember my grandma consistently, and I realized much later that she didn't remember me most of the time, except, you see, when my mom would call from where they lived and my Boro Amma would be on the phone. She'd remember my mom fine. She'd chirp out her name and talk to her, and there I'd be standing, watching. And then in the middle of the conversation, she'd stop, and suddenly this light of recognition would go off in her widening eyes as she's staring at me. "Juice, is that you?" she'd say, like I'd just got FOB or something. And then she'd juggle a conversation with my mom and me, telling my mom, your son is here," while doing her best to reach out and give me all the pets and hugs she could muster. This happened enough times for me to realize that there was something about those specific conditions that would short-circuit something in her brain to let her suddenly recognize me. What are the other times? One day, in the middle of a talk, I just outright asked her, "Who am I?" She scrunches up her face, and I can tell she feels bad, and she makes a few terrible guesses, and then shakes her head. "Then what are you thinking when you see me? I come in, I talk to you, you tell me about your dad, you let me feed you, but you don't know who I am? How is that not scary?" She looked at my face and said, "I don't know who you are, but I know you. I know you're good, and I can see that in your face. I can feel it." And that was that. God forbid if she was more of a crochet old woman, and with every right to be so IMO. Bedridden, bed sores, a memory that would last literally 5 minutes, that constant mist of confusion, frequently incontinent, unable to eat properly. She even kept reading all the way to the end, but I honestly don't know if she could actually see the words. She loved watching the news, though. But her gentle nature is what made her last years a time of relative comfort and peace. What else is there when you're trapped in a prison of your own failing mind? The times that light bulb would go off and she'd remember me, as soon as she'd hang up with my mom, I'd quickly bring up the times we spent together when my sister and I were children, and sometimes she'd remember of the times we walked around as the kings and queens of the nighttime world and how much fun we had. But I could hear it in her voice. Those memories were never as good as her favorite stories, somehow etched in her gray matter forever. She never forgot the stories about her dad. And if any of these stories are getting to you, please do hit me up with a subscribe and like for more videos just like this in the future. Story 12. Almost every summer, I lifeguard at this camp with another lifeguard around my age. We mess around a lot before the pool opens for the day, sometimes even waking up early just so we could take turns swimming for a little while. A couple of years ago, we just closed down the pool for the campers and, as per usual, began fooling around. Somewhere down the line, she found a busted up lawn chair and decided to sink it to the bottom of the deep end. We kept it weighed down with a few cinder blocks and posed with it underwater, just the typical stuff like pretending to sit in it or holding onto the armrests and acting like we were doing handstands. She had a waterproof phone case on her cell or something too, so she was able to snap a few pictures while we were down there. I know it wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it was the most fun I'd had in a while. There were lots of laughs and shenanigans during our time there, but that day holds a special place in my heart. I catch myself thinking back to that day a lot. It never fails to put a grin on my face and a spring in my step. I love getting to hang out with her when I can. We don't really see each other that much apart from lifeguarding together over the summers, so I'm really hoping the camp isn't canceled. Story 13. Last August, I loaded some camping gear onto the back of my bicycle and left my home in Wisconsin with the goal of riding to Seattle and down the Pacific coast. I was 20 years old when I started that trip and still lived at home with my mom and older brother. 3 months after I left, it was coming up on Thanksgiving. On top of Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, my birthday is also in early December and my mom's birthday is less than a week after mine. I realized I could spend my 21st birthday partying with strangers in a hostel, which is not my kind of thing at all, or alone in the woods in my tent, which doesn't sound like a bad birthday to me, but maybe not for my 21st. So I started thinking, okay, what about going home for the holidays? A few weeks before Thanksgiving, I was in Portland, Oregon when I bought a plane ticket home. My flight was to leave Eugene, Oregon a few days before my birthday, but unfortunately, I wasn't sure that I'd be able to make it to Eugene before Thanksgiving. I did end up getting to Eugene the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and although I missed my family, it was my first major holidays away from home and made me thankful for the fact that I wouldn't be doing the same come Christmas Day. The hostel I was staying at had a really fun potluck with some truly amazing people. That afternoon, I called my mom. Although I'd already booked the ticket, when she asked, I told her it didn't look like I would be home for my birthday, but I would work something out for Christmas before I quickly changed the subject. After I finished catching up with mom, she passed the phone to my brother and we finalized a plan for him to pick me up from the airport. The Tuesday after Thanksgiving and 5 days before my birthday, I was on a plane heading back home to Wisconsin. In the early afternoon, my flight touched down and I found my brother waiting for me outside the airport. He gave me a ride home and I had a couple hours to get settled in before we went to pick up mom from work. When I heard them pull into the driveway, I hid just out of sight of the front door until I heard them come in. The memory that never fails to make me smile is the look on my mom's face when I first stepped into view. It had been 109 days from when I rode my bike down our driveway to when I stepped off that plane. The longest I'd ever been away from home on my own before that was just 20 days. As amazing as that trip was, it started to take a toll on me, never seeing a familiar face, always worrying about where I was going to sleep that night. I needed a bit of a break, a return to normalcy. Just seeing mom again was great, and the fact that she had no idea was coming made it even better. Story 14. The memory of watching my pester basically knock his front teeth out always makes me laugh. New York City, maybe 7th grade, recess at a park with a rectangular paved area that had 4 basketball hoops set up in the middle of each side. The class is playing football and I am picked pretty much last, as usual. Paul is a QB and he tells Alex to run a zigzag pattern up the middle and he will pass it to him. Paul tells me to go long with clear intent not to throw it to me under any circumstances. Alex has been tormenting me that year. He had curly hair, beady eyes, and buck teeth. I loathed him. The play begins. Paul steps back, waiting to throw to Alex. Alex is running full speed ahead with his head turned back to Paul. I'm lazily running parallel to Alex, watching him because that's where the ball is going to go. Alex is now fast approaching the metal pipe holding the basketball hoop. I'm interested in this. Then I realize he is definitely on course to it just as Paul sends the ball spiraling to Alex, who has his arms up and his face still turned to Paul. "Watch out, Alex!" I yell instinctively, and Alex turns his head just in time to run into it. Alex is down. He sits up, pokes at his mouth, and says, "My teeth! Where are my teeth?" The teacher looks in his mouth, and sure enough, both front teeth are missing. Everyone, look for Alex's teeth, yells the teacher, which was the final straw for me. I began laughing uncontrollably as I and the other kids are all picking up bottle caps and whatnot as if they might possibly be Alex's teeth. Several people, including the teacher, remonstrated with me for the discourtesy of laughing during such a grim moment. But I was beside myself. It was all just too delicious. Turns out he didn't knock his teeth out, he knocked them in. Painful dentistry ensued. So yes, that memory never fails to delight me. Story 15. Oh, these two memories never fail to make me smile. I know it says one, but trust me, it's worth it. Memory 1. My grandma was not the cookie baking kind. She was more mistreating and barely feeds me, so needless to say, I sometimes swipe food, but as a kid, I really had a thing for peanut butter, especially Skippy's Chunky. When my grandma noticed, she would tell me to go to my room and an hour later unlock the door to toss me 2 giant jars of Skippy's Chunky PB. And she said that if I didn't finish the 2 jars by lunchtime, I was not going to have lunch or dinner. She underestimated me. I finished both. My mom asked me what I wanted for lunch when she came home from work, and I looked my grandma straight in the eye and told my mom, well, a PB&J triple stacker sandwich sounds great right about now. Her face looked priceless. Memory 2, I used to own Pokemon Crystal, and I treasure all my Pokemon games to this day, and I had a thing of, if a game is stolen, heads are rolling, and my Crystal went missing one day in the 5th grade. I saw it sticking from a kid's backpack pocket. I snatched it and proceeded to get him back and forth across the classroom until the teacher came in after talking to a parent and saw me beating a classmate black and blue. She dragged me to the office, and I had the principal and a police officer by him. This was back when some, if not most, Southern schools could use the scared straight tactics by bringing a PO assigned specifically to the school district to scare the kids. And he said that due to the injuries that I placed on the student, the cop will have to call in his pals and send me to jail. And I don't know what came over me, but it might have been adrenaline and the fact I watched Diary of a Mad Black Woman. Tyler Perry is still king as Medea. But I straight up looked at the two with a sneer worthy of Tyler, and I said, I ain't scared of no popo. Call the popo. Call the popo. And the principal and the PO looked at me funny, and as they tried to contain their laughter, called my mom to explain what happened, and even though I got suspended, I managed to make my principal, my mom, and a police officer laugh as a small 5th grader was sitting at the principal's office, quoting Tyler Perry with such confidence that the police wouldn't do anything, that they decided to quote Medea voice tone, and all in front of the person who can throw me in a jail cell for a week to scare me, and a guy who can expel me, and all I got was 1 day of ISS. I am picturing a tiny little white boy telling the principal to call the popo, and I am just straight up tickled. Story 16. Okay, I'm sorry in advance because this might be a long one. So, this was on my birthday, and my parents took me to a dinosaur park to celebrate. I really recommend visiting a dino park at least once. They are amazing. Unfortunately, my imagination as a child was running wild. For example, I had no problems walking through the park and looking at the dinos, but when my mom said I should stand right next to a 15-meter sculpture of a T-Rex, no way. I thought these dinos would come to life and take me. I now know they can't, but I was a little kid and thought that's how dinos worked. Now, to the core of the story, we were walking through the park, and in front of a tiny bit of forest, there were 2 triceratops facing each other as if they were going to run into each other and fight. They looked really scary, to be honest. But then my dad said he was going to take a picture of me, and for the picture, I should stand right between the 2 dinos. Needless to say, my stomach dropped because, again, I thought they would come to life and take me. They brushed off my concerns and forced me to stand between the 2 triceratops. Remember that bit of forest I mentioned earlier? Well, most likely not, but anyway, in that bit was a squirrel which was audible through its rummaging through the trees. As my dad was getting the camera ready, I heard the squirrel, and since I was so fixated on any sign of the dinos coming to life, I immediately thought it was one of the triceratops and started screaming my lungs out while crying and running to my mom for comfort. My parents saw the squirrel and instantly knew what went through my head and started laughing hard. Back then, I was scared and mad at my parents for laughing, but almost 11 years later, I can laugh with them. And to this day, I know for a fact that if I went back to a dinosaur park, I'd get scared. Story 17. The day I met my fiancée. I only partially joked that it was love at first sight. I was interviewing where he worked. At the time, I didn't care whether I got the job or not. I wasn't nervous either way, it was just some factory job. But then he walked into the lobby. He had on a face mask and had a hairnet and a lab coat on. So you could only see his eyes, but man, he had incredibly beautiful brown eyes. And then he took off the hairnet and dark hair flowed out in slow-mo, I swear, super thick and wavy and gorgeous. And then he pulled off the face mask. I immediately became scared of getting the job because he works here. We never really spoke until about a year into my being there when I was transferred to his department. Here and there, we'd joke or do dumb things, and it turns out we have the same sense of humor, the same morals, and the same cleanliness habits. We confided in each other about our current relationship issues. We were both being abused and taken advantage of. He left a bitch and I left a grown man baby the following month, and we've been together ever since. Every day, I feel blessed and I can't believe my luck. He's seriously so perfect. I've had butterflies in my stomach since the first day I saw his eyes. Story 18. The first time I could actually hear sadness in someone's voice was a moment I'll never forget. Okay, so this sounds morbid, but bear with me. I had just moved to a European country for my studies and was all alone. No family, no friends, nothing. About 2 months after the term started, I was in an accident that forced me to stay home for 7 weeks to recover. I hid it from my parents who couldn't just leave their jobs and fly over to take care of me. And I was not in a condition to move at all. I hadn't made many friends at the time, and my housemate worked a lot and spent a lot of time at her parents' house, so in short, I was incredibly lonely. To pass the time, I spent all my time on forums, social media apps, and creative outlets. That's where I met a really nice guy who had just moved to a new country whose language he didn't even speak. We started a tentative friendship that eventually turned into a 3-year long-distance relationship, which we ended on really good terms. Now, the moment that always makes me smile, we were FaceTiming after class and I left my friends in the noisy bar to sit in a quiet chain cafe. There weren't many people around because it was cold and miserable outside. We just passed the time talking about nothing and everything. We played music. He was home, so he would play a song on his laptop or let me choose a song to play. We were in our perfect little intimate world with a population of just 2. It was one of those nights that live with you forever. Sure enough, my iPhone battery decided to rain in our parade and I was at 1%. I told him I had to go and my phone might turn off at any moment since I didn't have a charger with me. And that's when I heard it, the saddest okay I've ever heard. I know it sounds horrible to smile at someone else's sadness, but that moment made me feel really appreciated, welcomed, and loved. He made me feel wanted and missed with just a 2-letter word. It broke my heart and made it beat so fast at the same time, I swear to you I can still feel my cheeks on fire. Now, even though our relationship ended and we both have our own respective partners, we are still good friends. That moment makes me smile every time I think of it. For me, it marked a love that never faded away. A love that started off romantic but then reshaped itself into friendship and pure human happiness. I'll always be grateful for his sad little okay. Story 19. The first time my fiancée asked if she could kiss me, we met on an app and clicked amazingly well right off the bat. She was sweet and funny and cute, and I couldn't believe she liked me. Our first date was at my house. I'm a caregiver for my dad, so I don't leave often. We watched the 13-hour The Staircase series on Netflix because we're crime enthusiasts. I wanted to kiss her so badly, but I've always read about guys being schmucks by trying to push, and I wanted to hold off a bit. Maybe wait for a special time. Did we lock eyes? At the end of the date, I had no idea what I was doing. I hadn't had a date in over 14 years, so I didn't know what adults do. There was one point where we were chatting and she looked me in the eyes and said, "Can I kiss you?" This blew my tiny mind. After being alive for 32 years, I always thought the kiss had to be natural and at some kind of special, triggered moment, but I never considered you can just ask. I stumbled out, "Yes, absolutely," and it was done. Even thinking of it now, I can't get the smile off my face. Story 20. Before my last ex and I started dating, I was too nervous to really talk to her aside from short conversations and pleasantries. I couldn't think of a way to approach her without seeming awkward. We met at work in the dining portion of a big athletic school where I was a cook and she was on loan as a server busgirl from one of those day labor agencies. I would often deliver food to the fancy clubhouse on the other side of campus and grab coffees for the cooks and servers in my kitchen. She was always tired, being a full-time fine arts student and working right after, so I figured I could be the caped caffeine crusader to her day. And one day, I walked up to her with coffee in hand and a punny joke ready. It had become a regular thing between us at that point. As I started my joke and handed her the coffee, her fingers lightly brushed mine while she stared at me with her big blue eyes. I just kind of broke. I started laughing and trying to continue the joke, but just couldn't get the punchline out. Every time I tried to finish the joke, I would just burst into nervous laughter. But the best part was that she couldn't stop giggling. After a minute or two of us just laughing in her own little corner, we finally calmed down. She just kept staring at me with a big, goofy, blushing smile on her face. We started dating not long after, and while it was short-lived, it was the happiest time of my life. It was the kind of love everyone deserves at least once in their life. It's been 2 years since she left, and I still can't stop thinking about her. Story 21. When I was in the 5th grade, I wasn't the greatest student. I had terrible homework habits, got removed from our school's superior students program. It was just us with puzzles and Time magazines, and my dad ended up getting laid off from work. He had to work at a Marco's Pizza, and the only thing we really got out of that was at least a meal every so often. Dad would bring home a ruined pizza, too few of an ingredient or added an ingredient that the customer didn't want, just about every day, so we had pizza for summer just about every night. As a child, that sounds like paradise, but after the first 2 weeks, it was almost sickening to smell pepperoni or tomato sauce. But yeah, I flopped incredibly hard academically. My highest grade was a D. I was soon forced to stay behind every day for the rest of the year. I would do my work and move to the next sheet. One day, my teacher found out I never wore socks at all and wore the same stuff for days at a time. I told her it was to save on laundry detergent and bleach. After a few days, she ended up giving me plenty of socks and even drove to my house to send us some clothes, washing soap, and detergent. She even gave me some more t-shirts and pants and basically helped me all the way. When my dad got a job at a box company and we got back on our feet, we were good for the rest of the year there. When we had the 5th grade graduation ceremony, I came looking like my granddad, sporting some dress pants, a pinstripe button-up, and suspenders. When we got our elementary school diploma, I walked over to my teacher and gave her the biggest hug I could, all while ugly crying my eyes out. Not only did she help me, but she was also retiring from my elementary school. She was one of the teachers who helped me more than ever. Story 22. One grandmother had this gorgeous antique ring that would be passed down in our family. After she passed away, my aunt was going to sell it as she had fallen on hard times. My other grandmother found out and purchased it from my aunt, so it would be still passed down to me, also while keeping my aunt out. I'd heard about the ring my whole life, but had never actually seen it. One day, I was sitting with my grandma and it came up in conversation. She asked me if I wanted to see it and brought it out for me. It didn't fit, but we had a good laugh and she told me the story again about how she had come to own it and why it was special. That was the last time I saw her. She fell into a coma a few weeks later and never recovered. While I went up to the hospital with my family, I chose not to visit her in the ICU because our last afternoon together had just been so perfect. I don't know what she looked like with the machines and on a ventilator, but I remember her laugh and the pride with which she showed me the ring. I wear it every day and think of both of my grandmas, but mostly of that simple, nondescript afternoon that was indistinguishable from 1,000 others we'd spent together, but for that one special moment. And if any of these stories felt special to you and you felt connected to them, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.